So, Professor Lee?
Yep.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Junior Fellows presentation session, and this will be chaired by my colleague, Professor Jason Lee at the Korea University. So I'd like to hand over this microphone to Professor Lee. Professor Lee,
thank
please.
You, Professor. Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Park, and indeed, very nice to meet you, and also very glad to moderate this SPEAC Junior Fellow session. Okay, so one of the objective of running this collaborative research project is actually breeding the next generation researchers who will build a solid connectivity between Europe and Asia. So I think this SPEAC Junior Fellows meeting is also very valuable, and I do appreciate the warm participation of the student, junior researcher both from Europe and Asia. So in this session, we have three presenters. David Alenga from Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and An Jin-hoon at Korea University, KUGSIS, and also Senior External Relations Officer at Asean Korea Center, and Diana Schnell, the Research Associate and PhD candidate at Ruhr-University, Bochum. So we have 1 hour for this Junior Fellows session, and we have 3 presenters, and we will receive the question from webinar chatting. So I would suggest a 15-minute presentation per each presenter, and then we will have 15-minute Q&A. Okay, so shall we start from David Alenga? Well, this is a very interesting theme of Eurasian pipeline connection, a case study of the power of Siberia and Nord Stream 2. Well, we especially the latter, well, which will be the hot potato between Russia, EU, and the United States. So, David, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let me share my slide here. Share my screen.
Still, the screen has not been shared.
Has not been shared. Yeah, you cannot. Okay, let me try it again. Okay. I think I have it here.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. A very good morning to everyone, and it's a great pleasure to be sharing my research work with you. It's an ongoing piece of work, and I'll be very excited to get your feedback and see how much I can further develop it. And this particular topic is actually part of my ongoing research on energy infrastructure. And my specialty is particularly within the Euro-Asian region, where I look at Russia and its energy policies across the region. And I found this as an opportunity to challenge myself to look at one aspect of it, which is a new part, the new projects, which is the power of Siberia. So I actually thought this was a good basis to look at the issue on the Parakana's thesis about connectography, where he argues that the new basis for understanding the world's geopolitical and economic governance systems is through infrastructure. So we have a different sense. It's no longer a question about looking at understanding the world from a traditional political sense. We have to begin to look at how the world is governed through infrastructure. And so I found that to be an interesting basis upon which to start my analysis. And one of the things, I'm just quoting him directly, he says, new energy discoveries and innovations have eliminated the need for resource wars. Global financial assets are being deployed to build productive infrastructure that can reduce inequality. And he further says that beneath the chaos of the world that appears to be falling apart, is a new foundation of connectivity pulling it together. And I found it particularly interesting, the last quote in particular, given that in the last several years, especially given Russia's geopolitical situation and Euro-Russian relations haven't been really very good, but then we still see infrastructure projects going on. And I thought this might be a very good basis to launch a study of this kind. So I have chosen to look at the power of Siberia, make a case study of the power of Siberia and Nord Stream 2. Both are pipelines that are designed to carry natural gas from Russia to Germany and by extension to the wider European gas market. And the second one is the power of Siberia, which is a very new project designed to carry natural gas, Russian natural gas, to the Chinese market for the first time in one of the most ambitious attempts at energy diversification that's taken place in recent years. And beneath all of it, I have a couple of overarching research questions that has been guiding my work on this particular paper. So first, the question I'm looking at, can Russian gas pipelines be the link in a new Eurasian cartography, a new Eurasian map, understand how infrastructure shapes, connects one part of Europe to Asia based on energy infrastructure links. So first, it's an attempt at political geography, understanding political geography, and in that sense, understanding geoeconomics. And in terms of the links with political geography, next question then comes in, whether this new cartography have an impact on political behavior. And if a close observer of recent geopolitical activities would understand, the biggest concern has been with Russia's perceived political behavior in the last, especially beginning in 2008 with the Russian-Georgian war going into Ukraine and other troubled regions around the area. So is there any sense that having such a link would bring about cooperation, or it might in another sense embolden belligerence and different forms of behavior? And about the same time, I have a quick commentary on the methodology and the sort of limitations I encounter in the process of carrying out this work. I use a case study methodology, which obviously has got some good aspects and it's got its own challenges. And I look at the key limitations that I kind of encounter is that to a very large extent, though both appear to be basic pipelines infrastructure, but there's a great deal of differences in terms of how they can be compared and very few similarities. So it makes it somewhat challenging to be able to come up with a very comprehensive analytical basis and to draw useful policy conclusions. So I'm quite conscious of that. And secondly, given that there's been a very long history of Russian gas infrastructure connections with the European mainland, practically there is very limited I think, very limited forms of gas infrastructure between Russia and the East Asian market, or particularly, the Asian market. And so the Power of Siberia apparently is by far the biggest, the first, and the most challenging project of its kind between Russia and China. And you'd wonder why choosing these two projects. Well, the whole rationale behind the Power of Siberia, as President Putin once put it, is to give an opportunity to be able to, for Russian gas market to have diversification options. So depending on market situations, you can switch it to either Europe or switch it to China on the Asian market. So the Russian Gazprom becomes like the central hub connecting both sides. And there isn't much work on the Power of Siberia. You'd have to dig in to Russian sources, and most of them by far are really in the early stages and mostly formal official reports from Gazprom and some state Russian government reports, which don't necessarily represent, can be presented as very independent and credible sources of information about a project of this magnitude. So it's just the early stages. So I'm plunging myself into a very deep ocean, and I'm not sure how I might be able to swim out of it. But that's the challenge with the Power of Siberia that I'm currently trying to deal with in this area. And I'll look at it next. Yes, and the core of this research is, if you look at the basis upon which to look at it, there's an energy security paradox. On the one hand, you've got Europe's need for security of supply. And on the other hand, you've got the Russian need for security of demand. And for much of the literature, there's emphasis on security of supply. And there isn't much about security of demand, especially from the Russian perspective. Why do we bring up issues of security, questions of security of supply? As early as 2010, as far back as 2010, there were issues about supply disruptions in Ukraine. Conflict, gas contract disagreement between Ukraine and Russia resulted in supply disruptions to mainland Europe. So questions are being asked, can we ever trust Russia to deliver its supplies to the European markets? If Europe continues to be dependent on Russia, which appears to be a very unstable supplier. And on the other hand, Russia sees attempts by some within the European Union that are not too keen to have Russian natural gas linked to the infrastructure basis of Europe, resisting it. Then concerns are being raised in Russia about whether or not they will be assured of the European market. And you have to, all of this comes to the background that up until now, Europe has been the traditional and sole principal market of the Russian gas industry. So Russia needs Europe, the European gas market, as much as Europe needs a little bit of Russia's. And as I said, which relates to the second point about concerns about Russia's capacity
David, may I suggest to speed up your presentation and deliver the core finding in 3 minutes?
Okay.
I would suggest.
Okay, yes. Then I'll just speed up towards this. I just have diagrams and sketches here about the structure of the projects, the pipelines running through how they feature here. And go to this. Yeah, so I'll just get to the key findings in here. For critics of Gazprom's goal of getting rid of Russia's primary goal is actually to have direct access to the European market by bypassing transit states like Ukraine, Poland, and others, so you can have direct links. And some are concerned that it's an attempt for Russia to be able to bully its way through and have a stranglehold on it. And there's another link on the power of Siberia, which is based on Russia's desire to diversify its gas infrastructure. And the evidence proves that Russia may not necessarily be very successful at that because it's just an interim, just in its early stages. And besides, Russia has been keen to emphasize commercial interest above political interest when it involves its energy infrastructure. And whilst the Nord Stream 2 appears to be very commercially oriented, the power of Siberia doesn't appear to be a commercial venture. The Russian state argues as it's a long-term project, but critics think that it's just a big vanity giant project. And and the conclusion have been that the best way to understand the Russian energy infrastructure network is through a Hobbesian worldview, where the Russian state believes in power and its ability to project and control. But that doesn't necessarily always reflect on the ground, as the power of Siberia seems to indicate. And is there an economic case for directly linking producers and consumers on both sides? I think, yes, that's a very important part. It's important to place emphasis on the economics, and that's very clear in this instance. And finally, the key point I found in here is that the infrastructure project, for whatever case on both sides, has no real impact on the political behavior of Russia. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David. Indeed, these two pipelines are Russia's major pipeline. One is going to China, and the other, the Nord Stream 2, is heading toward Germany.
Yep.
Actually, the Nord Stream 2 in recent years have faced the big geopolitical challenges, especially the objection from the United States. So it's being halted at the 92% kind of the completion rate. But indeed, it will be it is certainly an interesting contrast between these two projects from Russia's the political and geopolitical behavior. Okay, so we will. I will finish 3 presentations first, and then I will open the discussion flow. I think that will be the better to allocate the sufficient time for presenter first, and we will have some flexibility in managing Q&As. Okay, so I would like to move to the second presenter, An Jin-hoon.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Let me share my slide first. Can you all see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so good evening or good morning. My name is Jin-hoon An, and I am a PhD candidate at the KU Korea University GSIS. Well, first of all, I'd like to extend my appreciation to all the professors and staff members of the partner institutions of the SPEAC for giving me an opportunity to present my research. My study is titled The EU-ASEAN Partnership for Connecting Europe and Asia. And with this research, I tried to explore how the EU-ASEAN cooperation can play a role in connecting Europe and Asia at large. It is actually a great or nice coincidence to see that the EU-ASEAN have established the strategic partnership, but please bear in mind that this study was done earlier this year when the strategic partnership was not yet formed. So my presentation is arranged as follows. First, I'd like to discuss about the contextual background of my research. And based on that, I would like to share my research questions. Second, I will navigate how the bilateral relationship between EU and ASEAN has developed with a particular focus on the evolving approach of EU towards ASEAN. Third, I would like to highlight the major roadblocks that impeded in the past the realization of the EU-ASEAN strategic partnership. And fourth, I'll discuss about the rationale for officializing the EU-ASEAN strategic partnership in the context of Europe-Asia connectivity. Then I'll wrap up my presentation with some concluding remarks. Well, as you may be aware, the EU had devoted a sizable policy resources to its integration project with the adoption of the Single European Act in 1986. However, given that the EU had prioritized its internal integration project, its diplomatic presence in geographically remote regions such as Asia was comparatively limited. During this time, the strategic importance of Asia to the EU had culminated, especially when the EU trade with Asia overtook EU-US trade for the very first time in 1992. In recognition of a rising strategic value of Asia, the European Commission adopted the New Asia Strategy in 1994 to invigorate a region-to-region cooperation between Europe and Asia. And based on the guiding framework of the New Asia Strategy, the EU had taken important steps to strengthen its ties with the Asian countries, including the formation of the strategic partnerships with China, India, Japan, and Korea. And in the context of the region-to-region cooperation, the Asia-Europe meeting, ASEM, was established in 1996. While the EU's continued policy commitment to upgrade its profile in the Asian region led to strengthening its ties with the fast-growing Asian countries, its bilateral relationship with ASEAN was relatively underdeveloped, given that the EU-ASEAN strategic partnership was not formed at the time of this writing. And EU and ASEAN are becoming increasingly important to one another, both politically and economically. On the political side, ASEAN stands as a cornerstone of EU's dialogue with Asia. And on the economic front, ASEAN has emerged as the third largest external trade partner to the EU, and EU is the largest source of foreign direct investment to ASEAN. But at the time of this writing, again, the strategic partnership between EU and ASEAN was not realized, and the two regional blocs agreed only in principle to upgrade the relations to a strategic level at the EU-ASEAN ministry meeting in 2019. Now, against this contextual background, this study poses the following research questions. First, what were the challenges that impeded the officialization of the strategic partnership? And has the bilateral relationship reached a desirable point where common values under the framework of strategic partnership can be shared and practiced? And will the strategic partnership be conducive to promoting greater connectivity between Europe and Asia at large? So in addressing these questions, my study provides a descriptive analysis on how the bilateral relationship between EU and ASEAN has evolved, and it tries to shed some new light on the importance of EU-ASEAN strategic partnership in the context of promoting EU-Asia connectivity. Now, moving on to the general overview of EU-ASEAN relationship, the dialogue relations was established in 1977, which was institutionalized with the signing of the ASEAN EEC Cooperation Agreement in 1980. And building upon the institutional basis provided by this cooperation agreement, the two sides adopted the Nuremberg Declaration on EU-ASEAN Enhanced Partnership, which was followed by the adoption of the first ASEAN-EU Plan of Action covering the period from 2007 to 2012. In 2015, the EU mission to ASEAN, or EU embassy to ASEAN, was inaugurated. And in 2017, on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of dialogue relations, two sides renewed and adopted the new ASEAN-EU Plan of Action covering the period from 2018 and 2022. I wanted to especially highlight that the EU, in recognition of the rising strategic value of ASEAN, had made formal requests to upgrade the relations to a strategic level at the 20th and 21st ASEAN-EU Minister meeting in 2014 and 2016. But again, at the time of this writing, these requests were not materialized. And in the latter part of my presentation, I'll share some of the roadblocks that impeded the realization of the strategic partnership. Now, I would like to discuss about how the EU's approach towards ASEAN has evolved on a periodical basis. So the first phase can be referred as the period of courtship, covering the period from 1972 to 1980. And the key cooperation agenda at this time was focused on the trade benefits and market access. The EU-ASEAN Joint Study Group, for example, was established in 1975 to explore the possible areas of cooperation, especially relating to the trade matters. The second phase can be referred as the period of consolidation from 1980 to 1991. And during this period, the cooperative agenda was placed on the institutionalization of the economic linkage. And as you can see on the slides, the EU-ASEAN Business Council and EU-ASEAN investment committees were established during this period. But given that most of the ASEAN member states were least developed countries during this period, the economic cooperation was arranged within the framework of the donor-recipient arrangement. The third phase can be referred as the period of turbulence, experiencing ups and downs from frosty tides in 1991 to 1993, new dynamism in 1994 to 1996, and stagnation in 1997 to 2001. Now, despite such turbulent relationship in the 1990s, the EU recognized a strategic importance of ASEAN in implementing its New Asia strategy adopted in 1994. The strategic importance of ASEAN was well documented in the strategic paper named Creating a New Dynamic in EU-ASEAN Relations, which pinpointed EU's relationship with ASEAN as the cornerstone of EU's dialogue with wider Asia-Pacific region. The fourth phase can be described as the period of rediscovery, and during this period, dynamic changes in the regional environment have somewhat forced the EU and ASEAN to explore and develop new cooperation agenda. On the one hand, EU as an institution had undergone enlargement process in terms of the membership expansion, which brought the need to rethink its own institutional mechanism, including the restructuring of its external policies. On the other hand, ASEAN has strengthened the narrative on integration as it recognized the need to collectively respond to the external shocks, especially after the 1997-1998 Asian financial crisis. Now, reflecting this changing conditions, the EU released a number of policy papers that outline its new approach towards ASEAN, which includes a strategic framework for enhanced partnership, a new partnership with Southeast Asia, the Nuremberg Declaration, Plan of Action 2007 to 2012. The last phase can be referred as the period of elevation, and starting from the early 2010, geopolitical and geo-economic conditions in Asia have dramatically changed with the rise of China, the US rebalancing or pivot to Asia strategy, and rapid economic growth of the big emerging markets. Amidst the evolving economic and security landscape, ASEAN has placed itself at the center of the region's geopolitical topography with several ASEAN-led regional platforms, including the ASEAN Regional Forum and East Asia Summit. Against this backdrop, the EU adopted several policy papers to step up its engagement with ASEAN to underpin changing dynamics prevailed upon the growing influence of China and the US in Asia. And these include the Bandar Seri Begawan Plan of Action, Bangkok Declaration on Promoting ASEAN-EU Global Partnership, Connecting Europe and Asia, and ASEAN-EU Plan of Action. So key agenda at this point was placed on upgrading the relations to a strategic level after decades of dialogue relations. So what were then the roadblocks that impeded the realization of the strategic partnership? Some scholars argue that the EU's approach towards ASEAN is belittling rather than reinforcing the core value of ASEAN, namely the ASEAN way and ASEAN centrality. ASEAN had been able to maintain a modicum of ASEAN centrality in the regional architecture by exercising a leadership role in creating new multilateral platforms such as the ASEAN Regional Forum, ASEAN +3 framework, East Asia Summit, and so on. But the dominance of the US and China is pressuring ASEAN to make stark binary choices, which is straining ASEAN unity and its centrality. In this respect, it can be argued that the EU's greater engagement in the region will further complicate the regional architecture. The second challenge is more related to the trade matters that concern the individual ASEAN member states. For example, the EU had granted trade preferences to Cambodia and Myanmar under its Everything But Arms initiative. But the EU launched a procedure for a temporary withdrawal of the tariff preferences for Cambodia in 2019 due to unresolved human rights and labor rights issues. Also, the EU has initiated the Renewable Energy Directive, the second phase in 2018, which has been deemed as an initiative to phase out the palm oil imports, which has been seen as discriminatory by major palm oil exporters in ASEAN, namely Indonesia and Malaysia. So then what are the benefits and rationale for EU-ASEAN strategic partnership in the context of connecting Europe and Asia? The strategic partnership may strengthen the institutional basis for the EU-Asia connectivity. The EU-Asia connectivity initiative refers the ASEM and the EU-ASEAN framework as crucial tools to pursue a coherent approach towards Asia. The ASEM, although it's sometimes interpreted as ineffective due to its non-binding principle and the nature of informality, but in the context of the EU-Asia connectivity, it is expected to play a substantial role in furthering political, economic, and socio-cultural engagement between EU and Asia. Given that the ASEM comprises all member countries of the EU and ASEAN, as well as the two non-state actors, such as the European Commission and the ASEAN Secretariat, the EU-ASEAN strategic partnership will contribute to strengthening the EU's dialogue with Asia at large through the multilateral ASEAN fora. So let's look at the potential benefits of the EU-ASEAN strategic partnership. Once again, for EU, strengthening EU-ASEAN relationship will serve as a building block for EU-Asia connectivity strategy because ASEAN is the fastest growing economy and it stands as the cornerstone of its dialogue with Asia. So if the strategic partnership were formed, although it's formed 2 days ago, the EU will be able to establish greater presence in the region. Also, the EU will be able to diversify its economic cooperation in the midst of rising uncertainties due to US-EU and US-China tensions. For ASEAN, a close relationship with the EU will counterbalance the increasing influence of China and the US in the region, further promotes external financial support for its integration process, and internalize its business environment. So the last concluding remarks. Both EU and ASEAN stand at very important crossroads. On the side of EU, its domestic and foreign policy debates about its future are underway, with consideration to internal rebalance following the departure of the UK and its future external role in a fast-changing world outside its continent. And for the side of ASEAN, the rising rivalry among the major powers in Asia is exerting pressure on ASEAN centrality, and ASEAN's leadership role in this evolving and fast-changing regional architecture is being questioned. So therefore, the EU-ASEAN strategic partnership will reinforce one another in terms of gaining diplomatic leverage, and in particular, it will be conducive in realizing the EAC, the Europe-Asia Connectivity Initiative, and the EU's aspiration to play an even greater role in Asia. So that is all for my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right. Thank you, Jin-Hun. Jin-Hoon has examined EU ASEAN relation and connectivity was throughout the stages, and he also pointed out the some opportunities and possible challenges for the partnership. Okay, I'm gathering the question from the participating student via the Q&A the board. So I'm checking it, but in the meantime, we will move to the third presentation without a without a break. So Diana, Chanel will cover the issue of connectivity and marketcraft, EU-Japan cooperation in global energy and climate governance. So this is another the rising agenda in the global the scheme. So Diana, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for this great opportunity. I will now try to share my screen, hopefully in a full screen mode. Just a second. Okay, so let's see if that works the way I hope it works. Sometimes it does present difficulties. Do you see anything? Okay, I'm sorry, I will just retry one more time because for some reason I think it didn't go through. Do you see something now?
Your slide is up.
My slide is up. Well, great,
Yeah.
thank you. I will.
Okay, you're ready to go.
I'm ready to go. Okay, then I will just don't bother with the full view. Sorry about that. All right. So as you can see, my topic is connectivity and marketcraft in EU-Japan cooperation in global energy and climate governance. And to give the basic framework of that, connectivity between EU and Japan is most notably frameworked by fairly recent agreements, which is the Economic Partnership Agreement of 2018 and the Strategic Partnership Agreement, which is a bit larger, of 2019, in which is also embedded a partnership for sustainable connectivity and quality infrastructure. So this is the framework that we're looking at if we're talking about EU-Japan cooperation and connectivity. And the interesting part is that particularly within the third agreement, the Partnership for Sustainable Connectivity and Quality Infrastructure, we see that energy and climate governance, or generally energy and climate projects, do play a very significant role. A quick estimate within my study gave that, showed that there is about half, a little bit less, maybe 45% of projects that are being done or planned between EU and Japan cooperation are in fact in some way energy related. So this is in no way a small amount, which is probably not that surprising considering that energy and climate are two topics that are fairly global and that do require some sort of international cooperation and governance. Now, the background for all this is, as we already touched upon several times, is of course the geopolitical and geoeconomic shifts that are happening around the world now, and the EU-Japan partnership is oftentimes viewed, again, unsurprisingly, in the context of, for instance, the shifts that are brought about by rising China, or rather maybe risen China, and are sort of compared to the Belt and Road Initiative, although it's not completely comparable. They're also discussed in the framework of a changing US leadership. So these are also parts and topics that I will touch upon during my presentation, but the main purpose actually is to start and rethink once again, maybe concept-wise, what we're actually talking about when we are talking about connectivity in the case of EU and Japan, and also of course in other cases, and how connectivity may be different, in fact, from just simple cooperation, let's put it that way. That has been definitely happening before that, but connectivity is somewhat a new concept that has risen in the recent years and that has gained remarkable attention. So this is something that I would like to start with. And there are basically two main arguments that my paper makes in this context, and one argument is sort of my argument and the other one is not so much my argument. So the first argument would be, if we want to talk about connectivity, we're basically talking about markets. So in fact, my claim is that the most fundamental form of connectivity and connectivity creation is the creation of markets, because it is markets that enable the comprehensive exchange of resources, products, and services, and they connect individuals and of course also aggregate actors on different levels by enabling this exchange. So better developed and more integrated markets are well, able to produce stronger and more diverse and more stable flows of goods, services, capital, people, whatever you know, and thereby they create the very essence of connectivity. So this is something that's basically my claim. And the second claim that sort of is connected to that is a claim that I borrow from a political economist, namely Stephen Vogel, which is that markets don't just exist. They need to be created and they need to be governed. And this is basically what we're talking about then when we are talking about creating connectivity. It is talking about creating markets and making them work. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go into all the details of Vogel's argument because obviously it's fairly complicated and he has written well, I would rather say several books on that in one way or the other, but just to get to the main points, the idea that Vogel presents stems from the contrasting view between the market liberal approach that has been dominant for quite a while in the past years, where basically we're talking about stripping away obstacles for markets to work. And he presents it with an alternative perspective on markets and says that basically it's not about stripping away obstacles, but it's rather about creating institutions that make markets work. And depending on how well those institutions are thought through and how well they fit together, markets may work better or worse. This is the sort of the argument in a nutshell. So it's, for him, he calls it the market institutional view. It's important to create those complementary working institutions. And for that, he is looking at three different levels that are probably familiar to all of you. So we are talking about different types of institutions that can be created and can be governed and can be basically complemented. So we have norms and beliefs, we have practices and standards and laws and regulations. Some of them are more formal institutions, some of them are less formal institutions or even informal institutions, but in the end it is important that they all fit together. That is the argument, and that they go hand in hand to produce a framework in which exchanges, whatever kind of exchanges, can and will work. Now, usually when we're talking about institutions, it's something that we tend to discuss, is to say that informal institutions are more difficult to change, are more difficult to control, are more difficult to sort of create. But formal institutions such as laws is something that at least the government has more control over. So it is unsurprising that the starting point when we now plunge into the case study, if you will, of the EU-Japan connectivity is something that always starts with, well, we have a good foundation, we have shared norms and beliefs. And this is something that many researchers who work on EU-Japan connectivity basically point out, that EU and Japan are natural partners in a way, because they share this level of norms and beliefs. And then there are different norms and beliefs that are usually brought up. And so this is something that should come up naturally and should work naturally, right? But at the same time, and this is also something that the literature shows quite well, is that we do not really have the full potential achieved yet. So maybe a little bit like with EU and the ASEAN. And why is that? Well, there are different arguments that are made to explain this, but again, many things come down to distance. So it's about, well, these two partners are fairly distant partners. They are probably, or at least up until now, the argument is that the EU as well as Japan were fairly preoccupied with regional issues, not so much with global issues. Maybe there is also the issue of the priority of the partnership with the US. And these are things that basically are considered to be or to have been stumbling blocks. At the same time, many are now viewing the changing global environment as an opportunity to bring those two partners closer together because of, you know, US decline, which sort of opens up a new spot for both partners to engage with. At the same time, new threats and maybe other challenges. And energy and climate are also arguments that are sort of pushing those two partners together, in particular with regard to climate governance, that is becoming more and more salient in recent years as an issue that needs to be addressed on a global level, and in particular with regard to a retreating US, at least until under the presidentship of President Trump, and maybe a China that is still a little bit struggling to balance the goals of growth and environment. Many say that this is also the climate issue, something where Japan and EU can cooperate and create leadership. This is not that new. So obviously we have heard in the previous presentation that cooperation on energy matters has been going on for quite a while. It's for EU and Japan, it's very similar. They have started after the old crises of the 70s, more or less. But, and this is what I argue in my paper, the actual institution building or the questions about institutions, they only came with the 1990s, so to speak. This is where we starting to see some sort of government's approaches, and they are all linked to the rising climate change awareness all over the world. And this is also the time where Japan, maybe it's more the 21st century, starts to look a little bit to the EU as sort of a role model. But what we also see is that while there is some sort of a common ground and while there is more cooperation, there is also a fairly visible stumbling block in terms of hierarchy of what the priority is. Because of course, both Japan and the EU are trying to achieve energy security in terms of supply security and decarbonization. But you see that Japan prioritizes energy security quite a little bit more, while the EU is more focused, maybe at least within those market craft activities, focused a little bit more on decarbonization, which has a lot of which can be basically explained by different interests and different environments on the more domestic level. Also, we have the issue when we look at the domestic or more internal level, let's say, put it that way, that we have a different organization of energy and climate policies, which are integrated in the EU, but separate in Japan. You have the more laws and regulations focused approach in the EU that tries to basically exert market craft via laws and regulations, while Japan sort of prefers to gravitate towards practices and standards. And those stumbling blocks basically result in the fact that Japan and the EU still have difficulties to cooperate or to build a united front in international fora. But they now have the more and more the economic opportunity that sort of present them with the with the possibility to strengthen the market craft. And in my paper, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'm focusing on basically two areas. One is more the clean energy market and renewable energy market as an economic opportunity where theoretically something can happen, and the other is the LNG market. And the result from that is basically that the renewable energy market is probably not that conducive to market craft because first of all, it's highly focused on electricity, which is probably not going to be a globally traded commodity anytime soon. And on the other hand, we have a gravitation towards hardware markets, which are already global. So there is probably not that much room for additional market craft. This is different in the LNG markets that are basically, as Japan puts it, I think fairly well characterized by a sort of a catch-22 problem, whereby a range of global transactions is basically limited by a lack of an adequate institutions. So LNG markets are not yet global, and it's kind of difficult to make them global. This has a lot to do with the fact that they're dominated by long-term contracts and there are not that many spot market exchanges. But in order to change that, we basically need to build up new institutions and new markets for this, well, the LNG trade to become really global. And this will probably not happen by itself because there's basically a lack of a crucial amount of people who participate. So this is where, yes, I know.
Diana, time is running out. So could you wrap up?
2 more minutes.
In
2 more minutes.
In 1 minute, yep.
Okay, so this is where basically EU and Japan can cooperate, and this is what they do. So they have presented a few laws and regulations already during meetings and workshops, but, and this is basically the last main point that I'm going to make, the old problems are still salient in the sense that the EU is basically gravitating toward different priorities than Japan. And I think the biggest problem in this context is the creation of or the dissemination of practices and standards, because for instance, the EU is very set on saying that we actually want to phase out of fossil fuels, which means that we don't really want to invest in a lot of new fossil fuel related projects, which would be LNG projects, whereas Japan is trying to basically spread this or enhance the number of participants and further continues to invest. And I think this is a part where it really shows that the stumbling blocks are still there and need to be overcome. I don't think that I'm going to go through the whole conclusion because we are basically run out of time, but these are the points that I tried to make throughout my presentation. And if you're interested, you can always look them up a little more in more detail in my paper. So thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you, Diana. Okay, so we have successfully finished three interesting presentations, and I got a couple of questions from the participants. So let me go over those questions. And since our discussion time is quite limited, also, so I want you to be very brief and just to the point to the question. First, for David, there were two questions popping out. One is whether Russia is using the two pipelines, the Power of Siberia and Nord Stream 2, as a geo-economic leverage against Europe. So one is so. What is the kind of geo-economic concern of Moscow? So that was the first question, and the second question is, is Russia, from the European perspective, is Russia truly reliable? If not, is there any kind of plan B for Europe to diversify its gas supply, for example, from Africa and some other region?
Right. Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. I'll start with the first one, and the answer is fairly straightforward. In terms of the relationship, I started by saying that there's kind of like a mutual dependence But the truth is that the Russians need the European energy market more than the Europeans need the Russian energy market. And Russia doesn't really have a lot in terms of its ability to use it as a geo-economic leverage. In fact, the consensus, as I've argued in the paper, is that the Russians have consistently indicated that just treat this as a purely commercial issue and leave out politics out of it. And the issue of politics comes in mainly because of what I call the burden of history. Division within Europe, the Baltic states and some Central and Eastern European countries are concerned with Russia's politics. So they think that the energy issue can be used to leverage Russia, to influence, to get Russia to change some of its foreign policy activities in the region. And then the second question, concerns about delivery. Actually, the Nord Stream 2 is a reflection of the ability of Russia to prove itself as a reliable supplier. So you are the first Nord Stream that went through, and the second Nord Stream 2 was in response to the need for Russia to increase its gas supplies to the European market. And in terms of Plan B, yes, there's a lot of Plan B going on. There are other indigenous European energy sources, not necessarily just, Europe is not entirely relying on Russia. We've got supplies like Norway and supplies from the North Sea in the UK, and other alternative sources of renewable energy. We also have the liquefied natural gas. So these are all the things that in the Russia's calculus, gas is a very important strategic commodity for the Russian state, but they begin to realize that Europe is kind of diversifying itself. And so the Russians are actually seeking Plan B, which is in terms of the power of Siberia. But as I argued, it's not having a major impact. So generally, I hope I've been able to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And for Jinhoon, there was a question actually about the ASEAN and NGO. So actually EU ASEAN relations involve, well, it's not just kind of track one, but it also involves a number of the non-state actors and non-state organizations. So can you see this NGO in the ASEAN, the list of NGO charter in the ASEAN charter, can it become a basis of the non-state actors' cooperation with the EU's EESC to broaden the partnership in the future?
Thank you, Professor Lee, and thank you, Wolfgang Pape, for the question. Well, so the ASEAN Charter does provide the legal status and institutional framework for ASEAN. But as you may know, ASEAN is an intergovernmental organization, which is built on the sovereignty reinforcing regionalism, whereas for EU, it adopted the idea of supranationalism, where national sovereignties are pulled into common institutions. So the role of ASEAN as an institution really varies depending on the cooperation agenda. And in this regards, the ASEAN itself is placing a great emphasis on both track 1 and track 2 cooperation, as Professor Lee mentioned. For track 1, the government-to-government cooperation, and track 2, the social civil societies cooperation, including the academia or NGOs, and these corporations do matter in finding the resolution for any kind of cooperation agenda. Thank you.
Okay, and for Diana, actually there are two questions. The first question is how the Fukushima accident in 2011, how Fukushima accident have affected the relation between the European Union and Japan in energy cooperation. So that was first question. And the second question is, can Japan catch up in energy cooperation with the European Union considering it's currently very low level of renewables. So how can we make a valid argument and a valid case linking the renewable the cooperation, especially in terms of market craft between these two regions?
Okay, thank you. So I will start with the first one because it's a little bit easier to to answer. Fukushima accident did have, in fact, a very large impact on the cooperation between EU and Japan. And I think the biggest impact was in the area of energy security. So it once again highlighted that there is a need to cooperate to enhance energy security for everyone. It also, of course, had a little bit a shift towards basically new forms of energy cooperation. So what we see after Fukushima is also a lot more focus on clean energy markets, but also more focus on, again, the gas markets, because through the Fukushima accident, of course, particularly in Japan, there was a huge shift towards more incorporation of LNG for the energy supply in Japan, because they turned down all the power plants that were nuclear power plants, and this this lag had to be substituted somehow. So we actually did have a surge, so to speak, in this cooperation thoughts after Fukushima, and it went basically in the two directions that I investigated in the paper. So more cooperation clean energy, more cooperation LNG. Which leads us basically to the second question, which is how can cooperation between Japan and the EU work if Japan is basically lagging behind in terms of introduction of renewable energy. And it's true that Japan is lagging behind significantly, because even, at least for now, the most ambitious goals are about a quarter maybe of electricity production that should be supplied by renewable energy for 2030, which is not that much if you think about it. But the thing is, well, first of all, even if you consider that, I think cooperation is still possible, because it's not only about cooperation like in renewable energy in terms of we're creating solar panels and wind stuff, but also other elements of clean energy, such as, for instance, hydrogen, where EU and Japan are discussing also possible ways to cooperate, which reflects interests of both parties. Also, even if Japan is not introducing, for instance, more renewable energy into its own market, it is still very much interested in participating in clean energy markets outside of Japan. So we still have Japanese companies that are very much interested in having a piece of the cake. So I think for cooperation itself, it's really not that significant if Japan is going to introduce more renewable energy in its own market or not. And last point, and then I'm done. There's also the question cooperation, and this is what I tried to frame a little bit in my paper, in my presentation, is not necessarily the same as connectivity, at least in my understanding. So the creation of certain rules and certain markets and frameworks is, from my understanding, a little bit of a different setup. And I think, once again, even if there is not so much real connectivity potential maybe in the field of renewable energy, there is still a possibility for cooperation. And on the other hand, there is still possibility to create connectivity, even if it's not necessarily in those booming markets, for which maybe, you know, a case in terms of gas can be made. Okay. I hope that answered the question, helped.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I will have a very short round, very short second round of question. Actually, first to David. So we are going back to your original kind of the theoretical, the conceptual approach. So does energy cooperation causes any change in Russia's Hobbesian worldview? So is Russian changing throughout the process of energy cooperation? So yes or no, yet?
No, that's quick
No.
answer is no. And on social constructivist views, yes, I've looked at the literature on that, and clearly it also doesn't clearly put the Russian worldview in a very, the Russian worldview a lot of times is always interpreted and viewed from a very realist and
Okay, so well, is there any room for social constructivism, kind
yes.
of identity formation repeated in repeated gain in your case?
Yes, there is.
Okay. And Jinun, so what difference will SP can make at this stage?
So the strategic partnership provides the institutional basis for promoting greater connectivity between Europe and Asia, in addition to the existing strategic partnerships with China, Japan, India, and Korea. And other institutional arrangements can also follow suit, such as the free trade agreement between EU and ASEAN. And these types of institutional arrangements are very much important in achieving the external policies. That's all I can say for now. Thank you.
Okay, and lastly to Diana. So you have pointed out a number of the kind of the differences and obstacles, but if we see the kind of the positive side of the future, do you have any suggestion how the difference between the EU and Japan can be overcome? So what is the suggestion, recommendation?
Oh wow! If I had a real good policy recommendation, I might just go for it with the EU. But I think the key might be a shift towards more of a pragmatic and business-oriented point of view, because I have the feeling that probably the differences won't be solved on the high diplomacy on the government level, probably, but maybe we need to sort of create the right incentives for those actors who are actually doing stuff, who are actually following the practices and standards, which would be probably businesses and other actors. So I think the key is on the level of practices and standards and how we make people follow them. And this might help if we can maybe look at the matter a little bit more from the, I don't know, multinational businesses point of view, to see how we can create the right set of incentives for them and institutions for them to behave in a way that leads us to more connectivity and to our joint goals.
All right. So once again, thank you very much for your answer. Actually, those three the papers were actually also very interesting to me, but I will save my question maybe for at some point for the next the opportunity. But I may end up with a very brief comment on your kind of suggestion and for your research, maybe from the reverse way actually. Well, a couple of weeks ago, actually, just a few days ago, just a few weeks ago, Japanese Prime Minister Suga announced the Japanese version of Net Zero initiative, and Japan has recently made a pretty fast, it's based on feed-in tariff scheme, very fast the growth in renewable energy sector. So and European Union is taking steps toward the European Green Deal. So especially and Paris Agreement is hopefully is reviving again. So maybe in between both at the market level and state to state level, maybe at the Japan and EU and as well as Korea and even China can make the good progress. David, well, it was a wonderful topic, and actually the both pipeline LNGs, well, it is linking Russia, Asia, and Europe, Eurasia. So hope you will continue your research. And Jin-Hun, a lot of people are interested in EU ASEAN connectivity, the project, also linking and potentially the people to people and also infrastructure level. So that is wonderful topic, and in the very near future, I hope you to be a very active researcher linking these two continents. Once again, thank you very much for 3 junior fellows of SPEAC. So, and let's give a warm round of applause to the 3 presenters. All right, so I will wrap up the junior fellow session, and I will pass the mic to Professor Sung-Hoon Park and Professor Sebastian Bersick for the final closing session.
Thank you, Professor Lee, for your efforts to preside this very interesting and very valuable session with junior fellows. Sebastian's presentation was really excellent, and we have been enriched by this 3-hour discussion with the scholar and with junior fellows. Thanks a lot. And Sebastian, do you have any last words for today's event?
Yes. First of all, a big thank you to those in the organizing teams in Europe and Asia who made this online event possible. It's amazing how much work in the end is needed in order to make these online sessions running, and I think we can be quite satisfied that we managed to construct connectivity, even though COVID-19 takes a toll on all our social lives. So, well, Sung-Hoon, I really do hope that we will soon meet in person.
Yes.
And, I think that the SPEAC Junior Fellows did a great job as well. All of you can access their papers on the website of the project, and there is more to come. So this is getting bigger.
Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sebastian, and also to the participants of this workshop. Or we have counted at the highest number of 125, and now it's reduced to 70. It was a really very excellent and very rewarding kind of event that we had. And to the student audience from Europe and Asia, Korea, we have some opportunities to provide to you, especially as junior fellows. You can write papers and have similar activities like the 3 junior fellows have done today. So please visit our website of the project, and you can find some call for proposals for the junior fellowship. And also I'd like to thank our SPEAC team members in Bochum, in Uppsala, in Lublin, and in Singapore and Korea, that we have done very interesting discussion for two days. Yesterday and today we had very long, but however very productive discussion we had. And we will make a minute of the meetings, and we will disseminate it so that we can keep in closer touch, and we can proceed with our project. Thank you very much for all you have done, and thanks a lot. And let's see.
Let's meet again soon. Again.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Let's try to see each other.
Yes.
Offline. Yes.
Good. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
David, Diana, and Jinun, you have done excellent jobs. Thank you very much.
Indeed.